Madam President, I said earlier this week when we came in on Monday that every day I would come to the floor, and other senators I know are coming to the floor, to sort of, let the American people know what Mr. Romney and Mr. Ryan are trying to hide from them. What they're trying to hide is what their blueprint is for America, where they want to take the country. Oh, yeah, you can listen to all their speeches and stuff on the campaign trail, but show me your budget and I'll show you what your priorities are. A budget is a blueprint, and we have from Mr. Ryan, our colleague in the House, his budget. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's been passed twice in the House, and almost every Republican, I think, voted for it, the same as over here. So if Mr. Ryan and Mr. Romney were to be elected to the presidency and vice presidency, they would be able then to move this through, their budget through, under a little known kind of procedure called reconciliation. It's kind of a fancy word, but all it means is that it would go through with 51 votes. Now, I think it's important for the American people to know what's in that budget, what's in that blueprint for America. And that's why this week I have taken the time to talk about the impact of the budget on health care and on education. Today I'd like to talk about the impact of this budget on where I live, rural America, in the Midwest, where the occupant of the chair lives, up in the Midwest. What is the impact of the Ryan budget on those of us who live in small towns, rural communities, who live on farms, ranches in the West? What's the impact? Well, I think, first of all, it's important to step back and sort of take a look at his budget blueprint overall. What it really does is it further decimates the middle class in America. The very centerpiece of the Ryan budget is a dramatic shift of even more wealth to those at the top, targeting huge new tax cuts for the richest 2%. Those making over $1 million a year, and I've used this chart before and I will continue to use it. For those making over $1 million a year, they would get a $265,000 more in tax breaks. $265,000. That's added on to $129,000 that they already get from the Bush tax cuts. So under the Ryan plan, if you make over $1 million a year, you're going to get $394,000 in new tax cuts. You're entitled to that. That's an entitlement, okay? If you make that much money, you're entitled to get that tax cut. So when you hear people talking about entitlements, remember, it's not just the poor, it's the rich too. They get a lot of entitlements. So they're going to have all these new tax cuts. Totals $4.5 trillion over 10 years. Well, where do they get that money? Well, they don't want to say how they would pay for it, but we have to look at the budget. The Republican budget, the Ryan budget, would partially offset the tax cuts by making deep, draconian cuts to programs that undergird the middle class, essential to a quality of life in our country. Everything from education, student grants and loans, law enforcement, clean air and clean water, food safety, medical research, highways, bridges, and other infrastructure, agriculture, and energy. I've said before, the Republican plan would end Medicare. The Ryan budget ends Medicare. They keep saying, well, it ends it as we know it. Well, as you know it, that's what it is. It replaces Medicare with voucher care, not Medicare, voucher care. It would completely destroy Medicare. Now, they say, well, you can take your voucher and you can keep Medicare if you like, or you can go out and get a private plan. Well, if you're a really healthy elderly person, you might be able to get a really cheap plan out there someplace. So all of the healthy elderly leave Medicare. It leaves only the sickest and the poorest in Medicare. The costs skyrocket, and it becomes unsupportable. That's the way they destroy Medicare. Now, again, they talk a lot, Mr. Ryan and Mr. Romney, about reducing the deficit. Reducing the deficit. Balancing the budget. Even under the most rosy assumptions, the Ryan budget does not balance the budget until the year 2040, 28 years from now. 28 years. So Mr. Ryan is a true acolyte of former Vice President Cheney, who, in a very unguarded moment, said deficits don't matter. Well, they obviously didn't, if you see how much deficits went up underneath the Bush-Cheney administration. So obviously, Mr. Ryan is also, he won't say it, but his budget shows it. They don't think deficits matter either because they have deficits for the next 28 years. So again, when I tell people this and I outline the budget for folks back home, they say, you must be kidding. Nothing could be that extreme. Well, the Ryan plan is extreme and unbalanced, but I'm not making it up. Even former House Speaker Newt Gingrich criticized the Ryan budget. He called it right-wing social engineering. Well, all I can say is, Newt, you got that one right. But you don't have to listen to Newt. Let's listen to the economic advisor to really the icon of the modern-day Republican Party, President Ronald Reagan. Look what he said. So what Mr. Bartlett said. He said, distributionally, the Ryan plan is a monstrosity. The rich would receive huge tax cuts while the social safety net would be shredded to pay for them. A monstrosity. Now, this is the economic advisor to President Reagan. President Reagan wouldn't have a chance in today's Republican Party, not with the Ryan budget. So again, the Ryan budget is radical. And in shrinking the size of government to what it was more than a half a century ago. More than half a century ago. Well, today I'd like to focus specifically on the devastating impact of the Ryan budget, the Romney-Ryan budget, on American agriculture and on our quest for clean, renewable energy and energy independence. The Ryan budget would make deep reductions in our federal commitment to America's farmers and ranchers, to rural communities, and to consumers, especially consumer safety. The Ryan budget calls for reducing funding for agricultural conservation. Over 10 fiscal years by $16 billion below the funding levels that we have now in the present Farm Bill. That amounts to about a 24.5% reduction in conservation of soil and water. Our nation cannot afford to back off on our commitment to agricultural conservation, not at a time when climate and weather are becoming more variable and damaging to the land, when farmers and ranchers need to keep increasing production to meet demands from a growing population. So more and more demands being put up our land, changing climate, and that's why conservation funding is so critically important. Farmers and ranchers have made tremendous progress on conservation. Yet about a quarter of U.S. cropland is still deteriorating from excess soil erosion. Concerning water quality, nitrates in the Mississippi River and its tributaries were 10% higher in 2008 than they were 20 years ago. There have been no consistent nitrate declines in the past 30 years. And here's just a couple of charts to illustrate sort of what I'm talking about. This is a nice pastoral view looking over some rolling cropland. And this is a gully. Now you can see they put up some plastic there to stop it, but this is Rain comes down, hits it, washes it off, down into the ditches. Well, that's sort of the before. That's before conservation practices. Let's take a look at the same picture after we've used some federal conservation plans and farmers' own money, and look what we've got now. A nice grassed waterway. Absorbs all of that rain. That's what conservation does. Well, and concerning water quality, here's another one. Here's a picture of a gully washer being eroded. You see the land being eroded there, stream bank erosion. Well, that was before. That's what it looks like afterward. Nice stream with clean water, a lot of bank protection, a lot of trees. In fact, the farmhouse in that last picture, you can barely see above the tree line there. That's what conservation does. The Ryan budget decimates that. It would cut 24.5%, almost 25% of all the funding for conservation in America. At a time when we know what's happening to the Mississippi River with all the nitrates going down the Mississippi River, with land erosion. As I said, at a time when our farmers are being asked to produce even more and more to meet a growing population. So again, and this doesn't just affect farmers. This affects all of us. You might say the conservation, sure, that looks nice. You save the soil, you save the water. What's that got to do with me? I live in San Francisco or Los Angeles or someplace like that. It has to do with the quality of life in America. It has to do whether or not we're going to preserve this bountiful land that we have for future generations, and whether we're going to commit ourselves to really having clean water and cleaning up our rivers and our streams, and to prevent our soil from flowing down the rivers. Now, that's conservation. Another troubling feature of the Ryan budget is that it would impose new and tighter limits on money appropriated for rural housing, rural water and wastewater systems, and economic development, as well as other vital Department of Agricultural functions such as food safety, agricultural research, education, and extension. The Ryan budget, adopted by the House, would overall cut the funding for, as we said, non-defense domestic appropriation by about 18.9% compared to the current appropriations level. That's for next year. That's for 2014 and for years thereafter that. So let's consider rural development programs at the Department of Agriculture. For fiscal year 2012, we appropriated $2.4 billion, rural development. That funding provides assistance to rural housing, rural cooperatives, other small businesses, rural water, rural wastewater systems. That figure for fiscal year 2012 that I gave you, $2.4 billion, was already 9% below 2011, and 2011 was 11% below fiscal year 2010. So what would the Ryan budget do? Slash another 19%, 18.9% from rural development funding. That would amount to a cut of roughly $454 million in 2014. $500 million. $500 million in cut to wastewater systems, rural housing. Or consider the food and agriculture research, education, and extension of the Department of Agriculture. The fiscal year 2012 appropriations for this was $2.3 billion. And again, that was a slight reduction from appropriations in recent years. $2.3 billion in fiscal 12, and fiscal 10 it was $2.59 billion. So we've already taken some reductions. We already know that our current levels of investment in federal food and ag research are falling far behind what's needed to meet the challenges that I just spoke about, the challenges of producing food more food to meet a growing world population, the need for exports, but to do it in an environmentally benign way which saves soil and water for future generations. Well, the Ryan budget, again, whops off another 18.9%. That'd be about $435 million in 2014, $500 million from these vital programs. And again, these don't just affect farmers. These affect all of us. Take food safety, just food safety. You know, people like to know that when you buy some food someplace, that you have a high expectation it's not going to make you sick. Well, the fiscal year 2012 appropriations was $2.5 billion for the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and $1 billion for the Food Safety and Inspection Service. That's the Department of Agriculture, that's FSIS, Food Safety Inspection Service. That deals with federal meat and poultry inspection. The FDA handles everything else. Now, if the Ryan budget were adopted, again, an 18.9% cut to both FDA and the Food Safety Inspection Service. Listen to this, that would be a cut of about $472 million from the Food and Drug Administration to inspect our food and our drugs to make sure that they're safe. And a cut of about $189 million from the Food Safety and Inspection Service that inspects meat and poultry. So consumers would have much less assurance about the safety of their food. And need I remind people that the Senate and the House just passed this year a proposal to reauthorize the Food and Drug Administration to give it more duties, more responsibilities, to do more inspections of food coming into this country from overseas. President Obama signed that into law, supported by Republicans and Democrats, consumers, pharmaceutical companies, food companies, everybody supported it. Great bill. Now, here's the Ryan budget. They're going to take about $500 million out of that per year. So we might have given them the authority in the authorization bill, but then we're going to cripple them, cut them off at the knees. We're going to cut them off. If we adopt the Ryan budget, take about $500 million a year from the FDA. Let's take a look at what it would do about energy, because this not only means a lot to Iowa, I think it means a lot to our country in terms of moving ahead to develop renewable, safe, domestically grown energy. The Ryan budget claims that President Obama has stifled domestic energy production by blocking or delaying production of oil, both onshore and offshore, and gas. But what he fails to acknowledge is that under President Obama, we have already opened up vast expanses of public lands for oil and gas exploration. Production of both has increased by 13% for domestic oil, 12% for natural gas since 2008. But the most egregious thing about the Ryan budget is it completely ignores and again hinders our development of renewable energy. Wind power. Wind power in America has now provided over 35% of the new electricity generation capacity installed in the U.S. over the last 5 years. In the last 5 years, wind energy counts for 35% of all of that. The wind power industry has doubled its electricity contribution 4 times just since 2000. So here's been the growth of wind power capacity in the United States since 2000. It's doubled it 4 times. Doubled it 4 times. And is continuing to grow. But again, the industry, the wind power energy now accounts for 75,000 American jobs. 75,000 American jobs. Heavily concentrated in California, Colorado, Texas, Iowa, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania. Well, Mr. Romney has said he wants to do away with the production tax credit. Wipe all that out. Well, I wonder how the people in California and Texas and Colorado and Iowa and Illinois and Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania might feel about that. Not to mention the other states where they're just now beginning to develop their wind energy potential. So the Ryan budget does away with the production tax credit, and Mr. Romney has given his stamp of approval to that. Now, likewise with liquid fuels. Americans clearly want to increase production and use of domestic renewable fuels. We have responded in the past with tax credits and renewable fuel use requirements, the renewable fuels mandate. Small business entrepreneurs have built ethanol and biodiesel biorefineries all across the country. They now supply about 10% of the fuel used in our gasoline-powered autos and trucks. That's 10% that no longer comes from outside our borders. And here is the expansion here of all of the biorefineries in the United States just in the last few years. Look how they've grown up. A lot of jobs there. A lot of jobs, a lot of liquid fuel. In fact, if you look at a chart of the expansion of liquid fuels and look at the decrease in imports from oil, they just about match. You just take a look going back to 2000. This is the increase in ethanol production. This is the decrease in oil imports. Boy, they just about match. As the ethanol production has gone up, oil imports have gone down. Well, Ryan budget basically says we should roll back all this federal intervention. Just roll it back. But they say it's okay for the oil companies to go offshore and drill offshore, drill in very fragile areas of our country. I wouldn't be surprised if they want to open up Yellowstone Park to oil and gas exploration pretty soon. I just want to share the Iowa experience, if I might, about renewable energy, because I think it speaks to the potential that we have nationwide. Up until a decade ago, 10 years ago, my state of Iowa was nearly 100% dependent on energy inputs. All of our gasoline and diesel came from out of state. Most of our electricity came from out-of-state coal. By contrast, today, Iowa generates about 20% of its electricity from in-state wind power facilities. We now have about 7,000 jobs in the wind power industry. We build the turbines, we build the blades, we build the towers, everything there. We're teaching a whole new generation of young Americans at our community colleges how to fix, repair, replace, and maintain our wind generators. So instead of paying others for imported coal or for coal-based electricity from other states, Iowans are using their money to build and install and operate their own wind turbines, generating electricity from our own in-state renewable resources of wind. Liquid fuels is the same. It's remarkable. As I said, remember, Iowa imported all of its oil and gas 10 years ago, gasoline. Iowa now has 54 biorefineries, produce about 4 billion gallons of ethanol and biodiesel a year. That is 50% more than the total amount of liquid fuels that we consume in a year. So Iowa, in 10 years, has gone from a total importer of liquid fuels to a net exporter. We make more than 50% more than we actually use. So we get to export it to other states. Again, good paying jobs. It's a renewable resource, higher incomes for farmers, helps Iowa economy better than the economies of the Mideast oil states. So, Mr. President, America can follow in Iowa's footsteps, but only if we continue the energy policies that have enabled these achievements. We need to extend the production tax credit, to extend wind power and other renewable electric systems across the country, like solar electric. The Ryan budget does not account for that. Does not account for that. They drop them. The Ryan budget drops all of these investments in renewable biofuels also. So again, Mr. President, as I said, each day we've looked at the Ryan budget from how it affects health, how it affects education. Senator Boxer from California and others have come out and talked about how it affects our transportation infrastructure in America. But I also wanted to point out what it does to our renewable energy sector and what it does to agriculture, especially conservation, and how it would decimate our efforts to ensure clean water and to stop soil erosion in all of our states, So, Mr. President, before I close, I just want to provide a broader context so that we understand the consequences of the Romney-Ryan budget. Going back to the 1930s, the American people have supported and strengthened a kind of a unique American social contract. That social contract says that we'll prepare our young and we'll care for our elderly. That contract says if you work hard and play by the rules, you'll be able to rise to the middle class or even beyond. That social contract says that a cardinal role of government is to provide a ladder or ramp of opportunity so that every American can realistically aspire to the American dream. Well, in one document, the Romney-Ryan budget would rip up that social contract, shred it. Don't take my word. Let's go back to see Bartlett's. I'm going to see Mr. Bartlett's quote again that I had right at the beginning, right there. Don't take my word for it, right here. This is Ronald Reagan's economic advisor. He says the Ryan plan is a monstrosity distributionally. The rich would receive huge tax cuts while the social safety net would be shredded to pay for them. How far do you think Ronald Reagan would get today with this Republican Party, with that kind of statement? So again, the Ryan budget would rip up that social contract, replace it with a sort of survival of the fittest, winner take all. It's sort of a tough luck, you're on your own. If you're born wealthy, if you live in the right circumstances, you're okay. Or if you win the lottery, God bless you, you're okay if you win the lottery. But otherwise, tough luck, you're on your own. I agree with what President Clinton said last week when he said there are two competing philosophies here. One is the Romney-Ryan budget philosophy of you're on your own. The other philosophy is what I think we have been proposing, and that is that we're all better off when it's a we're all in it together philosophy. And again, the Ryan budget, the Romney-Ryan budget, is a blueprint for where they want to take America. This is not just some phony little thing thrown out here. This is their budget. Tells you where they want to go. It's a blueprint for a building. It's a blueprint for what they want America to become. Well, I don't think that that's the kind of America that my neighbors in Iowa would find acceptable. And certainly not one they find for their kids, and it's not acceptable. Again, Mr. Ryan said that he had said that he had developed his views on his budget. They were informed by Catholic social teaching. Well, I don't know. I went to Catholic schools most of my life. That's not what I was taught. I wasn't taught that, you're on your own, that government has no responsibility whatsoever to ensure that you have decent health, safety, education, that you have a decent retirement so you don't get put in the poorhouse. I was taught that we're all in this together, and I see the bishops say the same thing. The Catholic bishops say Ryan budget fails the moral test. Fails the moral test. They reiterated their demand that the federal budget protect the poor and said the GOP measure fails to meet this moral criteria. So again, Mr. President, I've taken this floor every day. I intend to take it every day from now until whenever we adjourn to keep pointing out, along with other senators, what's in this Romney-Ryan budget. It's really scary. A lot of times, when we go out campaigning, we always tell people, you know, this is the most important election ever. How many times have you heard that one? This is the most important election we've ever. This is the most important. Hear both sides saying that. Well, I've been through a lot of elections, and I've said that a lot of times. I won't say that. I'm not going to tell anyone this is the most important election ever. But I will say this. This is the scariest election that I have seen in my lifetime. The scariest. Oh, sure, we've had our differences before with Republicans and Democrats, and we fight, and that's okay. That's fine. That's the political give and take. And even under President Reagan, who was more conservative than any president we'd had since probably Herbert Hoover or before, you know, sure, they moved the country in a more conservative direction, but it wasn't like this. It wasn't anything close to what this Ryan budget is doing. And even presidents who have run in the past, maybe with the exception of Barry Goldwater, but I don't know much about his budget. I dare say I'll bet it wasn't this bad. I'll bet it wasn't anything close to this. That's why this is scary. This is turning America back to where we were before Roosevelt. I don't mean Franklin Roosevelt, I mean Theodore Roosevelt. That's how far back they would turn this country. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Michael Medeiros and Alexis Florzak of my staff be granted floor privileges for the duration of today's proceedings. Mr. President, I yield the floor.